Hi, everyone. Welcome to the All Things Amyloid podcast, where we feature patients, caregivers, and clinicians who discuss amyloidosis, a rare and incurable disease. Amyloidosis occurs when the body builds up abnormal amounts of misfolded amyloid protein, which can lead to serious and life threatening outcomes. I'm your host, Mackenzie, an amyloidosis patient and founder of Mackenzie's Mission. Our goal for this podcast is to raise awareness and share firsthand what it's like to live with this disease, to care for those affected by it, and to treat it. We hope this leads to earlier diagnosis and start of treatment, which will improve patient lives. One of the organs most frequently impacted by amyloidosis is the kidney. Adapted from his video, Why is Amyloidosis Bad for Your Kidneys? Dr. Jeffrey Zonder from the Carmenos Cancer Institute provides a brief summary. He'll go on to describe how AL and AA are the two most prevalent types to affect the kidneys, detail how amyloidosis affects the kidneys, how this damage is assessed clinically, and strategies for reducing kidney damage moving forward.
I'm Jeffrey Zonder. I appreciate the invitation to come speak with you today about how amyloidosis affects the kidneys and how we assess kidney injury in the setting of amyloidosis, and also strategies for reducing that damage. I work at the Carmenos Cancer Institute in Detroit, Michigan, where I'm the leader of the multiple myeloma and amyloidosis multidisciplinary team. So first, let's just talk a little bit about amyloidosis. As many of you probably know, this is a group of various diseases characterized by misfolded proteins. And the type of amyloidosis, which I'll go into in just a little bit, is classified according to the misfolded protein type. These misfolded proteins self-aggregate and form fibrils, which can then form extracellular deposits in body tissues. And the symptoms patients have depend on which organs these deposits form in. It's also important to understand that in one of the most common types of amyloidosis, light chain amyloidosis, the misfolded proteins themselves, while they're soluble, are also toxic to the organs. And there's quite a bit of data to show that cardiomyocytes and also in the kidney, mesangial cells are directly affected by the uptake of misfolded light chains. So the most important first step is securing an accurate diagnosis. The likelihood of a specific organ being involved is dramatically impacted by the type of amyloid we're dealing with. So the nomenclature system for amyloidosis is A for amyloid, followed by some abbreviation that describes the misfolded protein that forms the fibrils. So for instance, I mentioned AL amyloid, that's amyloid light chain. The other most common type is ATTR, which is transthyretin amyloidosis. And there are different varieties of that with mutated forms of transthyretin, and there's also a type called wild type where there is no mutation in the transthyretin molecule, but it still forms amyloid deposits as people age. I mentioned here AA amyloidosis, and AL and AA amyloid are much, much more likely to affect the kidney than ATTR. One of the other interesting types of kidney amyloid is LEC2 amyloidosis, or ALECT2, which is not associated with any known mutation or polymorphism in the LEC2 protein, but there does seem to be some ethnic predisposition. So people of Mexican heritage seem to be most commonly affected, and then there are some other pockets, such as native populations, for instance, in the Northwest, in Northwest Canada, for instance. Now, what I'm showing here on the bottom is a glass slide with a biopsy, and this is how we figure out what type we're talking about here. We have this glass slide. This actually is a picture of a kidney biopsy. You can apply Congo red staining, which gives the characteristic apple green birefringence. That's how you know that the protein deposits we're seeing in the organ are actually amyloid. That birefringence is when you look at Congo red stained tissue under polarized light. Once you've identified an amyloid deposit, you can micro dissect it off of a slide, and then you can do tandem mass spec. And based on the peptide profile that we see when we do this testing, we can have we can arrive at characteristic profiles for any known type of amyloidosis. Again, this is really important because I'm going to go into treatment strategy for AL amyloidosis. That's going to be the main focus of today's talk. But many of the things that I'm talking about wouldn't be relevant at all if it were a different type of amyloid affecting the kidney. So knowing what you're starting with is really important in terms of predicting risk of progression and also deciding on a treatment strategy. So in AL amyloidosis, we should remember that this is a plasma cell disorder. There are clonal plasma cells in the bone marrow that make misfolded light chains. And remember that light chains are fragments of immunoglobulins. These misfolded light chains can form toxic soluble oligomers or clumps, and then they can form larger strands that deposit in organs. In terms of measuring light chains, really we only can measure the soluble light chains using a serum-free light chain assay. And our goal of therapy is to reduce the production of measurable light chains, which is like turning off the faucet, to reduce the subsequent production, downstream production of these tissue damaging oligomers and fibrils. And so our therapy right now, the standard therapy, targets plasma cells to try and shut down this production. And usually we use a combination of chemotherapy and antibody therapy in 2023 based on the results of randomized studies. Now, the way that AL amyloidosis injures the kidney is different than the way multiple myeloma, which is a plasma cell cancer, injures the kidney. In multiple myeloma, you might remember that it causes a kidney injury most commonly called cast nephropathy. And cast nephropathy is basically filtered light chains, not misfolded light chains, but just filtered light chains, basically aggregate with other proteins, Tam-Horsfall protein, and form these clumps in the distal tubular system in the kidneys. And certain, very high levels of light chains, but also dehydration or high calcium levels and other factors can contribute to the risk of developing this kind of kidney injury. We don't generally see cast nephropathy in amyloidosis. AL amyloidosis affects the kidney at the other end in the filtration system, the glomerulus. Remember, I mentioned that misfolded light chains are toxic to mesangial cells in the glomerulus. And as a result of this, you get extreme amounts of protein leakage. So, whereas in myeloma, if you were excreting 1,000 milligrams per day of light chains, that would be quite a bit of light chains in your urine. But when you injure the glomerulus in amyloidosis, you might have 5 grams of protein a day, 10 grams of protein a day, even more. And it's predominantly, it's a non-specific proteinuria, so it's going to be predominantly albuminuria based on what's in our blood, right? And when you get excessive amounts of proteinuria, that overwhelms the cubulin-megalin system in the proximal tubules, and that huge protein dump into the proximal tubules causes tubular injury downstream. So you get both huge amounts of protein, and then over time you get decreased creatinine clearance because of the resultant kidney injury. So our goal of treatment right now, as I said, is shutting down the production of these light chains that injure the kidney and other organs. And you can usually do that pretty quickly with treatment. The treatments I mentioned before, I mean, usually within 4 weeks or 8 weeks, you see a major reduction in light chain production. And the deeper the better. We try to aim for normalization of the abnormal light chain levels with treatment, and we want that to be sustained so that organs have a chance to bounce back. While that's happening, it's important to have a team in place to sort of manage the ongoing organ toxicity, because organ responses lag behind hematologic responses. You know, a hematologic response is the light chain response, but organ responses lag behind it by months and sometimes by more than a year. And in amyloidosis, the symptoms and risk, and in the case of heart involvement, that's a risk of arrhythmias, congestive heart failure, and death. In the kidneys, it's more a risk of eventually developing end-stage kidney disease and needing to be on dialysis. It's related to how advanced the injury is at the outset, because sometimes there's a damage spiral, a vicious circle sort of set in motion right from the get-go that's hard to pull out of. It has to do with, I mean, I'm going to sort of walk us through that and why that might be the case, why organs don't automatically just get better. First, our bodies are not fast or very effective at removing amyloid from organs once it's in the organ. We also have imperfect ways of sort of assessing how organs are responding to treatment. So, for instance, when we're trying to assess heart involvement, we look at blood markers like the NT-proBNP, or in some cases, imaging studies like an echocardiogram. With the liver, the primary lab we follow is the alkaline phosphatase. And with the kidneys, we're measuring the degree of protein that's leaking per day, and we're also measuring the glomerular filtration rate of the kidney as well, and that's derived by knowing what a patient's serum creatinine is, along with other factors. And so usually what we're looking for with the lab tests, we're looking for improvement in these numbers. So reduction in proteinuria without further decline in filtration rate is the main thing we're looking for with the kidney. And with best available therapy, 50 to 60% of patients will have a kidney response. But the definition of a kidney response, and this is what I'm saying, it's imperfect. The definition of a kidney response is a 30% reduction in the daily protein leakage, right? And so if you think about what I said before, that sometimes you can have extremely high levels of protein leakage, a 30% reduction, if you're starting at 15 or 20 grams a day, leaves you with a ton of proteinuria. And so even if you technically have a response, you are still in the range where you're dumping enough protein each day that it causes ongoing kidney injury. These facts are sort of the basis, the underpinnings of what we call the renal staging system, or the PAVIA renal staging system. And basically, this system that was developed by amyloidosis specialists in the Italian amyloidosis program, along with colleagues from the German amyloidosis group, show that if at the outset of a patient's diagnosis, the degree of kidney impairment measured by the GFR, or the glomerular filtration rate, plus the degree of proteinuria predict the likelihood of going on to develop end-stage dialysis-requiring kidney injury. And so the cutoffs are proteinuria of 5 grams per day and an estimated GFR of 60 milliliters per minute per 1.73 meters squared. And if you have neither of these, your risk of subsequent dialysis, assuming you're able to get a hematologic response, is actually pretty close to zero. But if you have both of them, your risk of ending up on dialysis within the first 2 to 3 years is 40 or 50%, according to this paper. If you have one or the other, your risk is kind of somewhere in between there. Now, you can affect this risk, as I sort of hinted at a moment ago, by getting a hematologic response. The risk is not as high if the genes can be controlled and ongoing amyloid deposition is controlled. Also, not all groups have found this exact same degree of risk. So, for instance, the Boston University group, which is a huge transplant center, in contrast to the patients who were treated in this original paper, who were generally treated with non-transplant therapy, and I'm talking about stem cell transplant, the risk of dialysis with patients who were stage 3 was about half as high in the Boston study as it was in this Italian study. So it was still predictive, but the degree of risk was not exactly the same. So I think what this gets at is, first of all, it tells us making an early, accurate diagnosis and getting patients started on treatment before they already have advanced organ involvement is key. And it also allows us to provide patients with some appropriate expectations about things that might happen or things that probably won't. I'm going to close out by saying that we are beginning to explore new strategies to try and impact organ responses. Right now, there are randomized studies underway of antibodies. One's called bertamimab. It used to be called NEOD-001. And one is called anselamimab, and that used to be called CAL-101. These are both antibodies that target amyloid fibrils and probably and also the toxic soluble oligomers, although that's a little bit harder to measure. But they don't target free light chains, and they don't target, importantly, plasma cells. I mean, what these antibodies do is they coat these tissue-deposited antibody fibrils, and they help the immune system clear these fibrils more rapidly. And so it's hitting the process at both ends. The randomized studies right now that are being done with both of these agents are in cardiac patients, and it's standard therapy with chemotherapy and anti-plasma cell antibodies, CD38 antibodies, with or without these fibril-directed antibodies, to see if simultaneous targeting of the plasma cells producing the light chains and downstream targeting the deposits that are already there leads to more rapid and more complete organ responses. We'll see. Jury's out. We do have some hints that this strategy may work from our early stage studies with anselamimab, and also in a previously conducted randomized study where there seemed to be some improvement in cardiac outcomes in patients with the most advanced cardiac involvement treated with bertamimab. So in the next year or two, it's expected that we will see results, the first results from these ongoing studies in cardiac amyloid patients. And if it turns out to work, it's certainly going to be a strategy that's applied to renal involvement as well. And with that, I will wrap it up. And thank you so much for your attention today.
Recognizing symptoms of amyloidosis when kidneys are impacted, such as proteinuria, also known as frothy urine, is key for making a diagnosis. With treatments available today to improve patient lives, early diagnosis has become the most important challenge facing patients today. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you'd like to watch Dr. Zonder's video, please visit Mackenzie's Mission Education Hub at mm713.org. Thank you for listening to the All Things Amyloid podcast. If you find our podcast informative, please follow and share it with others. If you want to learn more about the work we're doing at Mackenzie's Mission, please visit mm713.org. We'd also like to thank AstraZeneca Pharmaceuticals, Alexion Pharmaceuticals, Alnylam Pharmaceuticals, and Bridge Biopharma for their sponsorship to help raise awareness about amyloidosis. We hope you stay tuned for future episode drops. Thanks for listening.